Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Travel Show with your host, Ted Blank. Ted Blank is a travel expert, and he is going to tell us about Alaska. I know we're going to talk about today, which I'm excited. So Ted Blank, luxury travel and adventures can help you with any of your travel needs. And we're going to get right to it. Great to see you.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
So Alaska, what a gorgeous state. And I know that is something that's on so many people's bucket list.
It is. It really surprises me how many people I talk to who have had Alaska on their bucket list for a long time. And it's kind of funny because the first time I went to Alaska, I kind of didn't want to go. I'd been to Europe a lot, and I don't know, I just had no interest in going to Alaska. And I'm so glad that my parents twisted my arm and we had a chance to go, because it just is this incredible, scenic world apart. You know, even though it's part of the United States, it's a totally, totally different place. And it's really cool to go to. So if it's on your bucket list, definitely move it up to the top.
So when you say that your parents took you, tell us again about your upbringing, because you said that travel was a big piece when you were growing up.
It was. I grew up in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and my parents were kind of passionate travelers, and so our whole family had the opportunity to travel when I was young. My first trip to Europe was in second grade, but, you know, we did...
Was it lost on you?
No, it wasn't. I think second grade's a good time. Maybe if I was in pre-kindergarten, I might not remember it, but I do remember quite a bit about that trip. And, you know, road trips to the national parks, and sometimes my dad would have a conference that we would get to go to. But this was actually only about 5 years ago that I went to Alaska the first time. And it was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And so they invited the whole family to kind of check off this bucket list experience, which was to go to Alaska with them. We took a cruise up the Inside Passage. So we started out in Vancouver and sailed north to Alaska. And then we took the Alaska Railroad up to Denali National Park, saw that, and finished up in Fairbanks. And it's actually surprising to me how popular Alaska is as kind of a multi-generational family experience. And we, at that time, we were aged 5 through 75.
Oh, wow.
And so, you know, big range in ages. And everybody had a really great time. And we still talk about, you know, what a cool experience it was. And for me, just the first time you see a glacier in Alaska from the water, and you're close up and you can hear it and you can smell it and you can see it, you know, and it's really awe-inspiring. And I guess I wasn't prepared for that. And it's a cool thing. And I've gone back twice since then. Really a great place.
So obviously, if you went on this big trip with your whole family, there were a lot of moving parts. Is that where you really shine as a travel company, helping people, especially if they're in a big giant group? I mean, I'm just thinking of transportation from point A to point B. That is daunting unless you have someone helping you.
Yeah, it is. And that's what I do as a travel advisor. I think really two things. I help make the whole trip seamless. You know, if you're looking at a cruise and a tour and flights and transfers and all sorts of things like that, I make that seamless. And then the other thing I do is I help people kind of sift through all the options that are out there, because every cruise line, pretty much every cruise line in the world, sails to the Inside Passage in Alaska, and many companies offer tours on the ground in Alaska. And part of what I do is help people pick the right one for them.
And how do you do that, Ted? Do you try them out first?
I haven't tried every one, but I do try a lot of them. I do travel pretty extensively myself, and so I've been on, you know, pretty much every cruise line, not necessarily in Alaska, but pretty deep experience with that. But the most important thing is actually really to listen to my clients and to understand what it is that they're looking for in this Alaska trip. You know, if there's a family going with kids, you know, we want to find experiences that are really enriching for them. So they're not just seeing a glacier, but they actually might, you know, go to a park ranger demonstration on board the ship and learn a little bit more about how glaciers are made and how climate change is changing glaciers. So, you know, really to match up the travel product that's out there with the client and make sure it's a good fit.
So traveling to Alaska from where we're talking in the Twin Cities area of Minneapolis, St. Paul in Minnesota, how would you suggest we go about planning a trip to Alaska?
Yeah, so there are really kind of two major parts to Alaska. There's the Inside Passage.
And what does that mean? I've heard you use that phrase.
Yes, the Inside Passage is kind of the bottom of the thumb of Alaska, and it pretty much goes from Seattle or Vancouver up along the Pacific Ocean to Anchorage. And so that's where Juneau is, Glacier Bay National Park, Ketchikan, Skagway are some of the cities there. And there are basically no roads in that area. So really the only way to see the Inside Passage is by sea on a cruise.
When you say by sea, you're not out very far then, I would take
No,
it.
generally you're within sight of land on pretty much the whole
Those are my
cruise.
favorite kind of cruises.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of almost a river cruise. Yeah, you do, if you're going northbound, you'll leave from Vancouver and you'll sail between the Canadian mainland and Vancouver Island. And so, it's only a mile wide. So you're really almost always in sight of land on the
And
cruise.
how big is that cruise ship?
So that's one of the cool things about Alaska is that there is incredible variety among the cruise ships that are there. There are some that are as small as 60 or 70 passengers.
Oh.
And there are some that are as big as, 3,000 to 4,000 passengers. And so part of what I do is to try to match the right experience to the right
Do you like the
person.
county fair or a state fair?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or, some of them are more like a boutique hotel. Some of them are more like a big resort. Some of them are great for families. Some of them are not good for families. So lots of choices, but fundamentally the only way to really see the Inside Passage is from a cruise ship.
So you would recommend flying to Vancouver?
Yep. Fly to Vancouver. You can actually go in either direction. So you could either fly to Vancouver and go north, or you could fly to Alaska and go south. It's the same cruise either way.
And then how long of a cruise is that?
Typically 7 days. There are some that'll...
It takes 7 days to get from Vancouver to Alaska?
Well, you have to stop a few times. You don't want to miss
okay.
everything.
Right.
Yeah. So you'll stop in Ketchikan, which is a real neat fishing village. It also has a really... One of the interesting things about Alaska is there's so much interesting native culture there. And that was something that I didn't really appreciate until I went there. And so there's some really cool native museums. There's a totem pole park where you can actually see totem poles kind of in their natural environment, learn why they're made, what they symbolize. So that's Ketchikan. You'll go to Juneau, which is the capital of Alaska. And if you're going northbound, it's in Juneau that you'll actually see your first glacier. And so you almost can touch it. Not quite. You can almost touch it. And then you'll go north and you'll go to a place called Glacier Bay National Park.
Sounds beautiful.
It's incredible. And it's a national park. And it's basically a giant fjord off the ocean that has glaciers that come right down to the water. And so the ship will sail in there, and it will just kind of float around. And you'll see the glaciers. You'll watch them what's called calving, which is where they crack and the big chunks fall into the ocean. And it's so cool because you see it before you can hear it. You can see like the speed of sound in real life. So you have to watch really, really carefully. It's a time to be outside on deck and watch, but an incredible experience. And if you're there on a beautiful day, the sea otters are swimming around and the glaciers are calving. It's just truly the highlight of that Alaska experience is that glacier. And then you'll continue to go north. Most cruises stop at a place called Skagway, and Skagway is where the Klondike Gold Rush took place.
Really?
Back in the late 1800s. And so there's a scenic train that goes up into the mountains there, and it's actually as scenic as any like Swiss mountain railroads. It's really a cool thing. And then you'll end up in one of the ports for Anchorage. Anchorage is a little ways away from the main port, so you'll end up there. And then you could either go home if you wanted to, or if you wanted to continue, you could go up into mainland Alaska. And in that case, your destination is going to be Denali National Park, which is one of the largest national parks in the country. The centerpiece is Mount McKinley, or Mount Denali, as they call it now. But the park is immense, and it's full of wildlife. And so it's almost unheard of for someone to go there and not see caribou and moose and sheep, the Dall sheep, the mountain sheep that run up to the top of the mountains, and even bears and eagles, of course, everywhere in Alaska. So just the wildlife there is incredible. And the coolest thing I've ever done in Alaska is my dad and I hopped in a small airplane, and we flew up to the top, almost the top of Mount McKinley, and we landed on a glacier.
You did?
We did. And we got to get off and watch, look at the glacier. And this is where they drop the mountain climbers off who go to the top. We did not do that, for the record. God bless those people, but crazy experience. But you actually really get up close and personal with this mountain. And standing on a glacier is just incredible. I mean, there's nothing around you for forever almost. And you're on this tiny little plane with 6 other people, and you're just basking in this almost cathedral of glaciers. So that is a real incredible highlight. And then typically people will end up flying home from Fairbanks, which is sort of the northern big city in Alaska. And my big surprise there was how big the annual flowers were. I never would have thought that if you want to see incredible annual flowers, go to Alaska.
Right.
Well, you can guess why, right?
No.
24 hours of daylight.
Of course.
So the world's shortest growing season, but 24 hours of daylight. And the pumpkins and the cabbages, I mean, these cabbages, were as big as my car. So kind of just another little quirk of Alaska that you might not expect.
So what time of the year do you think is best to go?
The peak season in Alaska starts in the middle of May and goes through probably the middle of October. If you go much earlier than that, you're going to really get spring in Alaska, so it can be pretty chilly. It's not very busy in the spring, so it is a good time to go. But the peak time is kind of over the summer months. The only exception is if you want to see the northern lights, you have to go in the winter. Because, again, in the summer, they have 24 hours of daylight, and you don't get to see the stars in the sky at night. It's always light out.
So that is true. It's 24 hours of daylight, and then the flip side is 24 hours of nighttime.
Not quite 24 hours, but pretty close, yeah.
And does that throw a person's system off?
It does a little bit. It's good that the cruise ships and the hotels have pretty thick curtains because it's very strange to be going to bed and it's 10:30 at night and it's still light out.
So what do you think is the best way to see Alaska? Is it a combination of things like you just spoke about?
Yeah, we would call that a cruise tour. And so it would combine a cruise with a tour on land. And typically 10 to 14 days is kind of the amount of time that I would allow to go to Alaska. But that gives you a chance to see both that inside passage and main land area of Alaska.
And if somebody's listening and they say, gosh, I could do without the cruise part, or I could only do the cruise part, that's something you could help them with as well.
Yeah. Or the other thing, too, is, some people like to break it up into 2 trips and do the cruise one year and then come back and spend a little more time on land because there's, Alaska's a huge state. There's a lot to see.
So when you talk to clients, do you take back their feedback as well after a trip? Do you do like a little out briefing to see what maybe worked, or maybe they uncover some places that you hadn't heard about?
I do. I try to call every client after they get back from their trips. And I actually got a really good tip for Alaska from a client who had gone there. And that's in the little town of Skagway, which is that place where the Klondike gold rush took place. Apparently there's a really good little gin distillery right off the main square in downtown Skagway. I had no idea. So now I know where it is. So now I can point my clients in that direction, with feedback from another client.
So let's say somebody did a trip just like what you spoke of. Is that something where you would have a guide the whole time?
It can be done in a couple different ways. It can be done kind of independently, where you sort of have just the transportation arrangements essentially arranged for you, or it can be done as kind of a traditional guided tour where there is a guide with you the whole time.
And what are the pros and cons of each?
It really just depends on how you like to travel. I tend to, as I get older, appreciate having a guide. Well, somebody who knows where they're going, first of all, but they also know what you're seeing. And, I've done enough self-service things where you just read the plaques on the wall, or you listen to the little recorded audio guide in your head, and I don't know, I miss so much. And every time, even if I go to the same place twice and I have a different guide, I learn something new about the destination. So my personal preference is definitely to have a guide with me, but there are some people who just like to sort of do their own thing, and they're free spirits and they want to just kind of go as the muse moves them, and that's something that's also possible in Alaska.
So when you're putting a trip like this together, I think a lot of people are focused always on financial commitment to something like this. Is there a range that you could help people stay within?
Yeah, I mean, Alaska has a variety of different experiences, and they'll range from kind of the value priced up to the luxury products. Alaska is also a little more expensive than Minnesota, because everything has to be brought in either by boat or by airplane. But I would say if you're going to do kind of a 7-day cruise in Alaska, you probably can budget around $2,000 to $3,000 per person, including your flights to and from, the different ports. If you're looking to do the 10 to 14 day cruise plus the tour, that's probably going to start at around $3,500 per person and go up from there. And of course, with cruises and with hotels, there are a lot of different levels of accommodations. So, if you want a balcony, that will cost a little more. If you want a suite, that will cost a little more.
So planning something like this takes how long, Ted?
A lot of people who plan trips to Alaska start a year or more in advance.
Because it's a bucket thing.
Because it's a bucket list
Yeah.
thing. And, if you're taking 2 weeks away from your life, even if you're retired, that's something you kind of have to plan for. And in particular, if it's something that you're bringing the whole family along with, good gosh, with, graduations and weddings and babies on the way, it's really hard to plan around. So, the typical booking window for Alaska is about a year out. If people want to go still this year in 2022, there is some space available. So that's something we could definitely make happen. But right now, most of my Alaska trips that I'm planning are for 2023.
Starting in
mid-May of 2023.
Lovely.
Yep.
Anything else we should know about Alaska?
A lesson I learned in Alaska the first time I was there. We were taking one of the tours into the national park, into Denali National Park. So you take the little bus that takes you in and you get a chance to get off and walk around and see things. And there were some people who had difficulties with their mobility. And I felt really bad for them because Alaska had very clearly been on their bucket list, but they had waited so long that they couldn't really enjoy the full experience. And so a big part of Alaska is being outside and getting a chance to go on walks or hikes through nature. And so I would really encourage people, if it is on your list, do it while your body's in relatively good shape, because it will be a better experience.
Great advice.
Thanks.
Great advice. Ted, if people want to learn more about Ted Blank Luxury Travel and Adventures, how can they do that, please?
You can visit my website. It's www.tedblanktravel.com. You can call me at 651-964-8245, or I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/tedblanktravel.
Love it. Alaska, here we come, right?
Exactly.
Love it, love it. Ted Blank, Luxury Travel and Adventure. And this show is called The Travel Show on AM 1460 and FM 97.7 KDWA in Hastings. This travel show has been brought to you by Ted Blank, Luxury Travel and Adventures.